In August 1983, I visited revolutionary Grenada as I was working on a film about science and technology. I was impressed with the enthusiasm of the people and visited a number of projects, including a woman's cooperative producing jams and jellies from local produce. I had dinner one night with Jackie Kreft, the Minister of Education, who spoke about the country's many achievements. 2 months later, she was dead, brutally killed alongside Prime Minister Maurice Bishop and his colleagues. This led to an American invasion and marked the end of a unique Caribbean experiment.
They orchestrated a crucifixion that led to a Yankee invasion, betrayed the nation and turned back the revolution. Because of your greed for power, Austin and Pod, all you commit murder, but you made your biggest mistake.
Thank you all for staying to be part of this panel and discussion with you about the film we saw just now. Speaking with people, I've seen the film 3 times now, and it still affects me. My name is Michael LaRose, and I'm going to chair this panel with 2 panelists to speak for a short while, and then we'll open it up for discussion. 1979 was an important year. There was the election of Margaret Thatcher and the emergence of monetarism. The murder of Blair Peach in Southall by the Police Special Patrol Group, SPG. The birth of my son with my Grenadian partner Janice. And on the 13th of March 1979, the spectacular announcement of the Grenada Revolution, or Revel. Surviving Gary and his deadly mongoose gang, the Revel made Grenadians proud and sent shockwaves throughout the English-speaking Caribbean. I belonged then to a political group called the Alliance, which consisted of the Black Parents Movement, Black Youth Movement, Race Day Collective, and Bradford Black Collective. Members of the Alliance knew and had worked closely with Bernard Court and Maurice Bishop in London. New Beacon Books published the groundbreaking campaign book, How the Western Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British Education System, by Bernard Court, on behalf of the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association, SECWA, in 1971. The Alliance mobilized in support of the Grenada Revolution with public meetings in the Custody Centre in North London, Shepherd's Bush, and pickets demanded the recognition of the PRG by the Trinidad government. We exchanged statements of solidarity with both Court and Bishop as leaders of the new dual movement and the Revel. We were not uncritical cheerleaders, and there was a healthy dialogue between ourselves and the PRG leaders with criticism and suggestions. I was in Grenada in early 1983 and was aware of a crisis in the Revel. But the events on the 19th of October 1983 took everyone by surprise. We were shocked, traumatized, and confused. By first, the general strike and march of 8,000 Grenadians to free Bishop from house arrest, and then the execution of the NJM leaders and the gunning down of the demonstrators by the PRA soldiers. This was quickly followed by the installation of the Revolutionary Military Council, fronted by Austin and Cornwall, who imposed 24-hour martial law and a 4-day curfew. We put forward an analysis of events that said that what happened was a palace coup and counter-revolution by the secret or real faction inside the NGM, led by Bernard Cord. The Grenadian people knew nothing of this. Orel was the Organization for Revolutionary Education and Liberation, and we got to know about it from one of our members who had been involved with them in Grenada. So we published these publications, these documents: The Grenada Crisis, Statements of the Alliance, and Lessons of the Grenada Revolution by John LaRose. This analysis was fiercely contested by the Cord supporters who just wanted to concentrate on the US invasion alone. They even spread rumors that we were in the pay of the CIA. But what we were saying was quickly backed up by statements in intercontinental press by Don Rojas, George Louison, Kenrick Radix, and Fidel Castro. Our analysis was that, first, there was an internal counter-revolution led by Bernard Cord and the Orel faction in the NGM, who killed Maurice Bishop and other ministers, then turned their guns on the Grenadian people on the 19th of October 1983. I quote, "This not only paved the way for the US invasion, but also allowed the Americans to pose as saviors of the Grenadian people." Second, the external counter-revolution occurred on the 25th of October 1983, with the US invasion by Ronald Reagan to wipe out and destroy the Grenada Revolution. The US invasion had been planned since 1981. The US had the support of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, to invade. I want to call their names so we don't forget them: Eugenia Charles Dominica, Tom Adams Barbados, Edward Seaga Jamaica, Milton Cato St. Vincent, Veerbird Antigua. We have to thank Bruce Paddington for giving us this film, a comprehensive, powerful, and lucid account of an important part of Caribbean history. It informs us about the end of a 4-year Grenada Revolution. But out of defeat there can be progress if we learn the lessons of history. It is not useful to shy away from mistakes and unpleasant truths. There have been campaigns in support of those in the NGM and Orel captured and imprisoned by the illegal US invasion. There are books like The Second Assassination of Maurice Bishop by Pathfinder Press, which exposes attempts to rewrite what really happened. The 19th of October 1983 can be regarded as the second real revolution of the Grenadian people, which was barbarously snuffed out by the guns of the internal Orel counter-revolution. Over 30 years after these events, the painful process of merciless analysis must take place so that the goals and ideals of the Grenada Revolution can be rediscovered after learning the evidence of the lessons of advances and tragic defeats. What is sure is that the struggle for justice and human progress in the Caribbean region cannot be abandoned. To help us with this process, we're having this discussion and panel, and I want to introduce the filmmaker Bruce Paddington and Gus John to say some words. We can then open up the discussion for your questions, comments, and contributions. Thank you very much.
I had the opportunity to apply for a small research grant. And I suddenly thought, why not do a film on Grenada? Because it really hasn't been dealt with, especially from a Caribbean perspective. So I started some in-depth research, reading a lot of books and articles and pamphlets on the revolution. And we didn't start to do filming until 2011. We went twice. I went by myself the first time, just using an ordinary DSLR camera. And then I went back with a larger crew in October 2011. But it was still a very low budget, 4-person team, using 2 small cameras, one of them the same Nikon DSLR. And we filmed for about, not long, about 7 or 8 days. But we worked from dawn to dusk. The long interviews with Selwyn Strawn, with Ann Peters, with many of the persons you saw in the film. And then took the difficult job of going through all the material, and really then working on a script, because we didn't really have fixed ideas when we went in. We went in more as ethnographic filmmakers trying to find the truth. I like the work of Fred Wiseman. Some of you may know Wiseman's films. So I like trying to go in without too many preconceived ideas about what happened. So we did very long interviews, and then we had to go through them all and transcribe them, and the editing process, if any of you have worked on documentaries, can be a very time-consuming event. And then obviously to put the script together, we wanted to give the different narratives, the different perspectives. We found it was very important that if one person said A, give another person the chance to say their words as well. And so, and we also wanted to take the audience on a bit of a roller coaster, that just when you're convinced the Grenadian Revolution is the greatest thing out, through montages and photographs and slogans, we suddenly had a section on human rights, which made one maybe think maybe things weren't as perfect as they seemed to have been. And just when you were sure that the crowd had fired first, we got others saying no, the soldiers had fired first. So at all times we tried to give the multiple narratives, the multiple perspectives. And this was the challenge, obviously, in the editing, how to let the people talk, trying not to just give one point of view. Obviously, one's subjective biases do come through. I think the film is, in the end, pro-Bishop, but then Bishop did represent the revolution and represented the Grenadian people, as was witnessed by the thousands and thousands of Grenadians that came out to free him. So I will not say any more now, because I'd like to hear from Gus, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
I want now to introduce Professor Gus John, a Grenadian and a very old friend and comrade of mine. He's also written a book, Time to Tell the Grenada Massacre and After. Could you please welcome Gus John?
Craving your indulgence, before I make my comments, I think it would be in order to pause in respectful memory of those who perished on that fort on that day, either by being executed or losing their lives as they jumped over high walls in order to get to safety. I want to remember particularly Mrs. Alimenta Bishop, who passed on a couple of months ago, having endured the loss of her own husband, Rupert, followed by the loss of her son, Maurice, and then the loss of her grandson, Vladimir, Maurice's son, who was gunned down outside a nightclub in Toronto. We remember them. This is a very searing experience watching that film again. And for me, it has a certain poignancy for a number of reasons. I went to Presentation College in St. George's. Higher up the school were Maurice Bishop and Kenrick Radix. In the same year and class as me was that Prime Minister fellow you saw there, Keith Mitchell. On the 18th of October, in the evening, my father passed on in Grenada from natural causes. And even as we prepared, my brothers and I who were living here, my sister in New York, to go down and assist my mother in arranging his funeral, we learned of this massacre the following day. The massacre meant, as you know, followed by the invasion, that those bodies that were in funeral homes, Lacroix and Otway Bailey, were still there when the Americans invaded. They knocked out the electricity supply and dispatched trucks full of Marines to collect the bodies from the funeral homes and go and bury them. So my mother, who had been married to my father for 49 years and 2 months, was told after the invasion by Clinton Bailey, where the Marines told him they had laid my father to rest. It was an ignominious experience for me to think that my father, in the land that he loved, was buried by American Marines, invaders of that country. So it was a personal loss, a loss because it was the revolution and we all, as Michael was saying, supported it fully. A loss because having been at school with them in Grenada, I had also worked here in London with Maurice and others when he was here studying law, with Bernard, when he taught in London and became a member of the organization we started in the late 60s, the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association. I'll get straight to the point, and I shall shut up so that we can have some exchange. There's been much said, Amnesty, the Committee for the Release of the 17, and God knows who else, about the rights and wrongs of the judicial process that followed that invasion and the arrest of those people by the American invading forces. In my book, all who were responsible for putting Maurice Bishop under house arrest are implicated in his murder. Bottom line. Because it seems to me that however much you might believe in your ideology of Marxism-Leninism or whatever, however much you may have felt that Maurice Bishop was too committed or leaning too far in the direction of social democracy, all that we saw in the early part of the film, words from Maurice's own mouth, about the centrality of the people, not the Central Committee, simply went out of the window. So the people ceased to matter to the extent that even after they'd gone to free their leader from house arrest, those particular events about which clearly there are all kinds of contestations ensued. The people of Grenada were betrayed by that leadership. The Caribbean region was betrayed by that leadership. And all those people around the world who took hope from what was happening in Little Grenada with a population of 100,000 people, almost as many as the troops that went from Reagan, they had a right to feel that many of those people who were protesting about their imprisonment must have totally lost their minds. I engaged with Selwyn Strawn, as some of you will know, publicly here in London a couple of years ago, over 2 evenings when we just debated this whole business at Clapham in southeast London. And frankly, Selwyn has a point of view. It doesn't exactly marry up with that of that cold, unbelievable human being called Callistus Bernard. It doesn't marry up, but he has a point of view. I believe that there's a huge amount to be learned from that whole process. I do not believe that the succeeding governments have enabled the people of Grenada to learn those lessons, which is why we are grateful to Bruce for that film, because it is a key measure in that country coming to terms with that horrendously violent past. The 6th major conflict in that island ever since those who were brought there forcefully sought to liberate it from European colonizers. And so I rather hope that the film would be seen, studied, that the events that it portrays will be better understood. I'm dying to see what Bernard Cord has to say about it. All I understand he's writing a book. Ewart Lane, I think, has produced a book recently, which I am still to read, and so on. But fundamentally, what worries me more than anything else is the fact that the people of Grenada themselves, who owned that revolution, who gave permission to the People's Revolutionary Government to pursue a revolutionary course, that they themselves are having to deal in their own ways, private ways mainly, with that disaster and the significance of it in terms of what is happening in Grenada now, what is likely to happen there, and in the region, is not being fully understood because they're under the jackboot of the United States of America still. Enough.
I have been active in the struggle of our people for liberty and justice for many years. And one of the lessons I sort of missed from this production is that it did not give any sort of economic analysis of what programs were actually implemented during the struggle to actually make the great changes that we heard, the claims of reducing unemployment from 49% to something like 14% over a 3-year period. And also, I think that we need to also look at the ability of the teams that was put together, human resource, speaking in terms of human resource management of the revolution, because of course, you cannot actually achieve anything without proper management. And I think also we have to look at conflict management as well, which actually perhaps broken down in the struggles that pursued to end up in the derailing of the revolution. I would like to have some comments from the panelists.
What is true when you talk about management is that persons from throughout the Caribbean came, and England, Cresseur, some of you may know Cresseur, who wrote about the revolution. He, Merle Hodge from Trinidad, Didacus Jules from St. Lucia, Don Rojas from St. Vincent, Richard Hart. Many Caribbean persons, international persons came and worked often free of charge with very low wages to help promote the revolution. So I think the film does demonstrate the positive aspects of the revolution.
Just something on you raised the question of management. There was a quite important experiment emerging in the country during the revolution. I have direct evidence, having been involved in some of them, that the parish councils and zoners councils did work. Local groups of people in this village and that, or regionally in a parish, took on responsibility for managing services in a way that actually made it possible for the government to spend less money on those things because the people were doing it themselves. As I was saying at an event I spoke at the LSE about a couple of days ago, the tragedy is that once this implosion had taken place, those who succeeded, I'm not talking about that Schoon fellow, I'm talking about those who actually were running the country, decided not only to erase all signs, physical signs of the revolution, the slogans, the graffiti on the walls and so on and so forth. They also decided to shut down those systems, democratic systems within villages and parishes and so on. So in no time at all, the country reverted to what it was under Eric Gary and before. And all those advances, particularly in terms of youth and women, were effectively reversed. The Maurice Bishop patriotic movement tried to continue and keep some of those things alive. But effectively, the political opposition was such that it was virtually impossible for them to be sustained.
What you leave out is as important as what you put in. But I really want to thank you for keeping that line that Callister says, where he says that they decided to burn the bodies in order to preserve them. What a great line. And I know that might sound trivial, but that is what I am taking away from this afternoon. Thank you.
Just an anonymous little plaque that they've got on that fort there is a disgrace. A disgrace compounded by the fact that very little is done on the 19th of October by the government, but on the 25th of October, it's a public holiday. All churches are brimming over to give thanks to Papa Reagan. And there are those of us who are still campaigning with and in fact trying to get the Grenada government to remove the police from that fort and make it a peace center where the 6 conflicts that I've talked about before can be studied, recorded. There can be exhibits there, not just relating to the revolution and Gary's barbarism before the revolution. And people, particularly people coming into the country from elsewhere in the world, could actually get a very real sense of what that fort represented and why it is now still so important to the healing process in Grenada.
Right, bravo.
Hi, I was a 12-year-old child in London at the time of this revolution. Like probably some of you here as well, all I knew of it was really my parents terrified for their mothers and fathers who were left in Grenada, who were elderly, and what would happen to them. Were they going to be massacred? Were we going to get terrible news? I remember my parents being terrified and not really understanding what was going on. What I love about this film is that it's brought it alive to me. I knew very little about Grenada when I was growing up. Like a lot of kids, I'm really ashamed of my ignorance now. And in a way, my parents didn't really want to tell me what was going on because they wanted me to sort of have my mind in this country, not where they had come from, where they felt they needed to leave in order to have a better life. I find this film just so eye-opening. My dad would have come, but he's not well enough to come here, into central London now. But what I find really interesting about this documentary are the pauses where people are not willing to say what they really think. I feel a sense of shame watching this documentary of what could have been. And I know not really much about Grenada politics now, but I believe that what we're seeing on that screen are the people sacrificed for political gain. And I mean, I don't know what the political situation is like in Grenada at the moment, but from some of the politicians who are currently in office, who were featured and interviewed, God help that country.
Just a little quickly, there is an earlier version of the film ended with the poem Shame by Mo Collins, but I think we thought it was a bit too much of a downer.
Started off as a very popular revolution, broke down. It comes across in the film as simply, oh, this thing called oral existed and that was the problem. I think there were far deeper difficulties going on, and I think it would have actually helped a little bit if there'd been some sort of discussion around why what started out as a very, very popular revolution diminished. What is coming across in the film is almost there's an ideological difference between certain people, and in fact, the American report after the revolution that came out, that examined all the minutes of the NJ meetings, etc., actually finished off with the conclusion that there was actually no great ideological difference between Maurice Bishop and Bernard Cord. So that wasn't the reason all this broke down. The other thing that I think could have been concentrated on a little bit more is some of the events of that dreadful day when Maurice and the others were killed. Because some very important things did happen on that day. Somebody went and held up the telephone exchange, so there was no internal communication on the island. A gentleman that you mentioned. The fact that Einstein Lewison says, well, there were virtually no guns in what was the army headquarters, wasn't challenged. And in fact, you know, I think if you actually talk to a lot of people in Grenada, some of those apologists that appeared making certain excuses were amongst those that were actually on the floor who were shooting at people and actually started the bloodshed.
And in the end, the version I showed him, then I cut it down to 2 hours, 30 minutes, and you saw a 2-hour version. So, so obviously, you know, we have not included everything. We could I did an interview with a Rastafarian PhD person from Jamaica who spoke about what happened to the Rastafarians during the revolution. They were very pro the revolution at the beginning, and then then a lot of them were imprisoned by the revolution. So obviously I think I try to deal with the differences between the different factions. I have copies of all the minutes of the meetings, but that would have taken another half hour to deal with all of that. And in the end, I mainly used George Louison, who gave 3 main reasons why he thought the 2 factions had split.
I don't want to add too much more to that, except to say that, as Bruce indicated in his opening remarks earlier, it was a very complex situation. and if one were to examine what is known about the rift within the party and the Central Committee before Court resigned, and issues around the failings that certain members of the Court faction thought Bishop had, not applying a Marxist-Leninist position, not being good at strategy and tactics, and worst of all, leaning in the direction of social democracy. Those things were contested within the party, with different people adopting different positions, and that radiating outwards into the population, so that if you went to particular places where there were lots of Bishop supporters, you would hear all kinds of things, some of them rumors, some of them could not be substantiated. So that's the nature of that particular thing, and the extent to which it would have been possible for a film, this documentary, to capture that in the manner that you suggest. This man is a filmmaker, I don't know.
I feel a little bit emotional, being Grenadian as well, and supporting the revolution. What I'd like to say, I thank you very much for this film, this snippet of this film, what you gave to us. It took me back, because the last film I've seen 12 years of slave. This is great. Thank you very much.
Jeffrey Robertson, I think it was, one of the top lawyers from Trinidad Keith, Scotland, representing them. And they went from being sentenced to death to sentenced to life imprisonment, and then it was argued that they had served their time. Life imprisonment doesn't necessarily mean until they die, but it's 20 years or 25 years. And so these international lawyers argued the case and caused them to be released.
It was obvious that people were reluctant to talk about it. So thank you for the film, because it's obviously opened up a dialogue, and although you haven't included all the details, which is going to be impossible, but hopefully it will get some dialogue started. And my question was going to be, have you showed it to anyone apart from the panel that you showed it to in Grenada who were involved in making the documentary? If so, what was their reception to the film? And if not, do you plan to show it to people of my generation, because a lot of people only know about there was a revolution, Americans invaded, there was guns, but they're not really aware of the details. So I just wondered what your plans were in terms of interacting with Grenadians in Grenada.
My name is Selwyn Strawn, and I appeared in the film that you just saw. I want to thank Brother Bruce Paddington for extending an invitation to me to be here this evening. Of course, as you would imagine, this is a very emotional thing for me because of my involvement in the entire process. But before I make my comment, I really want to commend Brother Bruce Paddington for the tremendous effort he has put into the product which you just saw here today. And I think he ought to be given another round of applause for the good work. Even while I agree with one of the speakers that there are still gaps to be filled, but he cannot do everything at this stage. This is a work in progress. And this, in fact, in my view, is the foundation for more things to come, because the revolution was not a simple process in Grenada. And I'm afraid I can speak with authority because I was one of the leaders of the revolution in Grenada. Now, my first comment is that I totally and completely reject the paper presented by the chairman on this entire process. Completely reject. And it does not accord with the reality which existed in the film, as well as what took place in Grenada. I'm appalled to hear some of the statements that were made there. And the focus has been on an organization called OREL. I was part of the New Deal movement from the start. and I knew of the existence of Orel before the revolution. But that organization was dissolved. And the members, in fact, were absorbed into the neutral movement. So where's this counter-revolution point coming about, an oral counter-revolution that led to what happened on October 19th? This, to me, is disgraceful, very disgraceful. And if one were to, in fact, look at all the minutes of the meetings during that period, and if intellectual laziness was not exercised, you will in fact see that it was a completely different story. Read the minutes. Everything was done transparently throughout the period. So I do not know where these lines come from, that it was an oral counter-revolution. To me, that's a totally fabricated line, entirely made up so as to give a particular version as to what happened. We have to be honest and truthful. And some of the people, in fact, that were referred to were the ones who, and I can say so without fear of contradiction, who caused this tragedy to take place on October 19th. Don Ross was a major player in that respect. George Louison, who appeared several times in the film, was a key factor in this whole process. This should not have happened on October 19th. It shouldn't. We were on the verge of resolving this crisis, even on the day itself. Even on the day itself, before the crowd went up to Mount Prairial. We were on the verge of resolving the crisis. And then within seconds, everything went up in smoke. I cannot, in fact, go through blow by blow all the things that happened. You know. Well, if you all want me to spend the next 2 hours here.
When I give you a statement.
No, I know, but I said this is emotional for me because I know what has happened. What happened. And when I hear certain statements, I have to respond. I have to respond. Because the fundamental issue which arose in the party after the analysis, in fact, was done, and all the analysis and so on, was that we should establish joint leadership within the party, not the state, within the party. Of course, Maurice was concerned, and genuinely concerned about the proposal. But the matter was thoroughly discussed by the Central Committee, and even though there was a majority decision, that decision was not implemented until it was brought to the entire membership of the party. The entire membership of the party discussed the proposal thoroughly from 10 o'clock on the 25th of September 1983 until about 12 midnight. And even though Maurice had reservation initially about the joint leadership proposal, when he heard the ordinary members of the party giving their views and so forth, and pointing out that this was nothing against you personally, comrade leader, but as a way of, in fact, saving the revolution. Because by that time, the system was overloaded, and it was breakdown in the system. We only had 500 party members to, in fact, service the programs of the revolution throughout the country, and everybody was breaking down. And we had to take some fundamental decisions to arrest the situation. All these things are documented. They can be read. Nothing was held in secret. So why come today and try to rewrite history and try to give a different viewpoint as to some kind of small clique within the organization that in fact engineered this entire process? Okay. I was there and I know the scene.
Is that your point? Is that your point?
No, there are many more points, but I just wanted to focus. There are many more points to make. I just wanted to focus on, because you introduced the topic here.
Yes, I did.
And you, in fact, in my view, what you have said, in fact, was in contradiction to what the film projected and what the reality is.
No, I don't think there's any difference.
Well, I mean, I wanted the record. Let me finish, Mr. LaRose. I wanted the record to show that what you in fact presented was totally biased and totally untrue and incorrect and so forth. In other words, I could not in fact sit here and allow those comments to go unchallenged, and I have to in fact do it. That's my contribution.
Okay, you have to have that opportunity. As I said, I stand fully behind what I say. And that you have the opportunity, as people have said, to make clear exactly what happened.
covered, I was on BBC, the program Black Londoners, that covered the complete issues of what was happening here in Britain and what was happening in Grenada. I went down, not for the BBC because they will not accredit me to go to Grenada. It was an organization and a company that gave a ticket, and I flew down with Henderson Dalrymple for the Caribbean Times, down to Grenada about 5 days after the whole of this. Bruce, there are certain pieces there that I can supply some facts to. And the one I want to go straight to at this moment is the young man I interviewed. I don't know his name, he wouldn't give me his name, I'm not interested in his name. That was lying down under the Jeep when Maurice and Jacqueline were shot. I have the interview because the words that you've brought out in the film and what is not there, it matches very well. There were two of them brought onto the wall. The words that they asked Maurice to turn around is true, and he says, no, I'll face it. And he pleaded to them. Look at Comrade Krepp. She's pregnant, Comrade. You can't shoot her.
Right.
They let loose the bullets totally on Phyllis, on Krepp. And then they turned the bullet onto Maurice. The young gentleman was lying down, hanging on the Jeep. And he, down by the Anglican church, I interviewed him. I'm giving you the position. As somebody covering it here, I have covered from the Gary Fall. As a matter of fact, I lived on Hopeville Estate where Gary used to come to organize. So there is no part of that fort I cannot tell you about because my brother-in-law was the head of the armory of the fort. It's unfortunate that my nephew happened to be Beard Lane, who is part of the whole of this. I stand totally independent as a reporter, as someone responsible when I was being asked to go to Grenada against the will of the BBC. I can tell you what was going on in the newsroom of the BBC and what was going on elsewhere. I can tell you the story of how I was followed at home, who fleeced me, put me onto the plane and then sent me out of my own homeland. I can tell you of the bullet that was chucked in my back on the fort by a Barbadian soldier because I had a camera in my hand taking pictures. I can tell you so many things that are missing there and adds up to it likewise. In short, we must talk.
Help us to show the film in other parts of Britain, especially amongst the Grenadian population, Acton, Southall, Huddersfield. We'll welcome that, and I'm sure Bruce will welcome that as we go along.
The film has now been shown in 10 countries. It started off at the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival in September. It was shown 4 times there to sold-out performances at every screening. It was shown at the OWTU in San Fernando. It then went to Grenada in October. It was shown to the families on October the 18th. On October the 19th at the fort, it was shown to those attending the memorial service for Maurice Bishop, and that was a very emotional event, showing it at the fort exactly on the 30th anniversary of the killings. And then on the Sunday, we showed it at the Reno Cinema. It was packed. 500 people came to see it. I won't go through all the places it's been seen, but the place it received a standing ovation was Cuba at Havana Film Festival. Next month it's going to New York. So if you have any friends in Brooklyn, or Harlem, or Manhattan, or Rochester, we're showing it 4 times in New York, and then it's going on to St. Lucia and Barbados and Jamaica. So yes, as Michael said, I'm willing to have more screenings. if there was more money, I'd be willing to do more work on the film as well, because I would like to interview Bernard Cord, and he's in Grenada, he's in Jamaica.
What about DVDs?
Oh yeah, and then a little thing about DVDs. Those of you who are interested in finding out when the UK version of the DVD will be ready, I'll leave my cards at the front, so you can contact me with your address and so on, because we just, as we speak, I've just made the US version of it, but we will do a UK version of it as well. So those who are interested, please take a card. We also have a website, and we have a Facebook page for whatever film. Is the name of the name of the Facebook page. As to June's comment, I think some of the most important things about this film are the archives. I think that that took a long time to put those together, but I think it's wonderful to see it. I got access to a film by John Douglas, and I had to pay $4,000 US to use a few minutes of it. So it is expensive, but at least I got hold of a film that was actually made in the 1980s during the Revolution. I also got material. The hardest place was to get material from Grenada. That was very difficult, but I eventually got some material from them, including the interview with Bernard Cord, which was very important. The Cubans were very, very generous. They didn't have the original version, so I had to use the subtitled version, but I thought that was very important, especially the bodies being returned to Cuba. And the place that was the easiest to get archive material was America. The easiest. They were happy, and free of charge. You can have as much Reagan as you want. I said no thanks.
I welcome the beginning of the film, the quote from Malcolm X, talking about brainwashing. We mustn't forget that the US propaganda, the PSYOPs, the US spent hundreds and thousands of pounds on psychological warfare, dropping leaflets before the trial had actually begun, blaming the Cord faction. To this day, after the incident, after the tragedy of October the 19th, I understand that a number of Grenadians went to Sir Paul Scoon and asked him for a Commonwealth inquiry, an independent Commonwealth inquiry into the events, what had actually happened. This had been rejected. Well, Paul Scoon apparently accepted it initially, and then before we knew it, the US hijacked the whole of the judiciary. To this day, the written judgment, even though millions of dollars were spent for the most expensive Caribbean judicial trial, to this day, the court judgment has never ever been produced. And why? Going back to what Malcolm X said, we must try and undo the brainwashing and just question everything. Because what happened for a number of people held up and had their liberty taken away for 26 long years needs to be looked at in fairness and for the history books of the Caribbean.
Take you to the point. What created that to happen? And in the film you said about smoke being thrown in the house. Who threw that? How did that all come about? And there's a lot of things that went on in the film that wasn't quite clear to people like myself who don't really know the true story behind it.
What was this unclear?
Who led the people to get the leader out, and the smoke that was thrown in the house, and what made them take the Prime Minister up to the fort. And Pascal would like to know whether you're doing a documentary, because he's got a lot of knowledge on it as well.
And initially they thought that Maurice Bishop was going to go to the square, Market Square, and I think they were even getting ready to set up the PA system there and so on. But he decided to go on to the fort, and again, Louise on in the film said it was that he wanted to have access to communication, to maybe to call Cuba to let them know what was happening.
The other thing about the smoke.
Oh, the smoke. I don't know about the smoke in the house. Where he was under house arrest, obviously there was a lot of smoke in the operations room at the fort.
When it affected the people then up there, and then that's when all the shooting took place.
The smoke was caused by the bomb that had been, the missile, the rocket that had been fired into the building, causing the damage that Antitas was talking about. I think that's the smoke you mean, yeah?
And meddling and causing and helping to cause rifts. They obviously were not happy with a lot of Cuba happening in the Caribbean, so they were not supporting the revolution in any way. They were doing quite the opposite. So I agree with you totally on that point. In terms of also things that were left out of the film, which may have impacted upon what would have happened in Grenada, the Bishop has set up a Constitution Commission under Alan and Alexander from Trinidad, a very respected senior counsel, to actually come up with a new constitution that most probably would have had some form of elections. And I think I think there was potentially a very strong future for Grenada.
I would agree with that. In fact, soon after the invasion ended, Alan Alexander met with some of us in Trinidad, including George Louison, and was talking about that process, about what he thought impelled Bishop to be looking at alternative ways of engaging the Grenada people. Because he was very clear that something, I mean, the thing was in mortal decline, frankly. And he knew that if the Americans had attempted to do anything in Grenada, in 1980, for example, all right, they had the bomb on the 19th of June and so forth. But there was a resolve amongst the majority of that population who were very much focused on what the Americans would want to do to bring the revolution to an early end. And that is why there was such intolerance of those amongst them who they felt were collaborating with the forces that were against the revolution. But by 1983 summer, all of that was in disarray. There were rumors, counter rumors, people not wanting to engage as much as they did before, and everybody was concentrated on that sort of binary split between Cord and those who they thought supported him on the one hand, and Maurice Bishop and those who supported him. So the country was in a spin about all of that. And issues around gains in terms of unemployment, lowering of unemployment, fiscal policy and fiscal successes, etc., those things tended to pale into insignificance because the population just felt that something needed to be done, not at the level of the people, but at the level of the party and the government, if in fact they were going to get back onto an even keel. And that is why it was reckless, to say the least, for those people to determine that Maurice Bishop should be put under house arrest. The most damn fool, crazy thing anybody could ever have conceived of.
That the second Grenada Revolution was that day when the people took to the streets had general strikes and went to free their leader. All revolutionary processes has that contestation of ideas, and the ideas were what would be the future of the Grenada Revolution, and that was challenged that day on the 19th of October. If you want to find out more, I hope this film makes you want to go and do more. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for Bruce. Thank you for God.
They orchestrated a crucifixion that led to a Yankee invasion, betrayed the nation and turned back the revolution.